Hello and welcome to Adam Pince's Garage and Fabrication. Today we're going to be working on my buddy Nate's truck, and we're going to talk about how to properly check your front suspension on an IFS. And if you don't know what IFS is, it is independent front suspension. Now, if you know anything about front suspensions, checking them, you know that jack is in the wrong location. I just want to show you how far off you can be. Everything will feel just fine by having your jack in the incorrect location. See, everything feels tight. Nothing wrong, right? Wrong. Now we're going to put the jack in the correct location. And back again with the jack in the correct location. This is only 30 seconds later. I have not done anything to this truck. Haven't even driven it, moved it, nothing. Just moved the jack. Now watch. And you hear that? That is one of the worst upper ball joints. It's probably in the top 20 that I've ever seen. Getting ready to fall out. Now, the correct location for the jack. Okay, now the correct location for the jack makes all the difference. So on this suspension, this one is the 2500 HD. So it has a torsion bar front suspension. Lots of trucks have these, not just the 3/4 tons, but just the 3/4 tons and 1 tons for this particular year range. This one is an 08, and so it has that torsion bar, and even if you have the torsion bar or the coil spring set up, your lower control arm bolts directly to your spring. So the way that it is pushed, the spring is pushing down on the control arm, means you have to unload that control arm to actually feel any play in the suspension. So what's going on is when you pick the vehicle up, the spring is forcing down on the control arm, and the suspension reaches the end of its travel. Like your upper control arm actually stops moving, and then that spring is forcing pressure down on both ball joints, giving the appearance that there is zero play. Now when we put the jack under the control arm, and as you can see, it is kind of precarious, so do not ever stick your fingers underneath the tires. If you do so, do it at your own risk, and do it quickly and safely as possible. Some jacks won't give you the clearance to get right on the flat where you need to be. So you can see mine's kind of hanging off the edge. It usually works, it usually holds just fine, but be prepared, that could slip down the control arm a little bit on you, and you don't want your fingers getting pinched between Duramax and your driveway. It's not fun times. So be careful when you do this. So safety is paramount, and this is the correct way to check it. So I've unloaded by pushing up on the control arm. I'm pushing back on the spring, allowing the suspension to sit in a more normal state as to what it would be going down the road. And then we can now see that there is massive amounts of play in that ball joint. Now, one of the things that I checked, the first thing that I checked before I even jacked on the control arm, was a big thing with the torsion bar front suspensions, is people like to jack them up and make them sit really high in the front. And to do so, there is a bolt way back there on one of the cross members, back at the other attaching point for this torsion bar, and they'll crank that bolt all the way up. Now I've actually seen where even jacking off the control arm, the suspension couldn't move. It is maxed out, just sitting at a stance. And it seemed like there was no play in that one either. But then turning down the torsion bars and then jacking off the control arms, I noticed the suspension actually moved, and that truck, I did notice it rode extremely rough. It rode like it had no suspension because basically it had no suspension. The torsion bars were turned up so far that the suspension could not move unless you hit a massive bump. So it had all that tension on the control arms, and you couldn't notice that it needed ball joints. And that truck, I think I ended up doing, I did all 4 ball joints, but 3 out of the 4 were bad. There was probably only 1 good ball joint on that whole truck. So how you check your front end makes a huge difference. Okay, so another thing is to check your lower ball joint. You need to actually get out a pry bar, stick it underneath the tire, and put your hand on the top of the tire. So I'm gonna place the camera so you can see better how to properly check a lower ball joint. This one doesn't feel like it has much play, so you're not gonna see anything, but I want to show you proper form so you know how to properly do it. So you got one hand on your pry bar. I like to put the point down. That's kind of preference. It just helps grab into the pavement so the bar doesn't slip out on you. And I got a hand on the top, and I want to pick up. Now most of that play is in the upper ball joint, so you would need a second person to be able to tell if there is any play in the lower. There might be, there probably is, but it's masked by the fact that the upper is so bad. So you want to pick up, lots of force, give it a real good pull. And then obviously to check your tie rods, you need a little side-to-side action. And it's better with a second person. You have somebody put their hand on the tie rods, and then you can differentiate where any play is, if there is any play, and that just makes things a lot easier. And that's it.